Big companies pay thousands of dollars for 3D product animations all the time, and if you're a 3D artist, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get into this industry as well. So I'm going to show you just how I make these kinds of animations today, and then hopefully by the end of the video you're going to be able to do the same. I'm going to show you how I model, texture, animate, render, and edit these little commercials using Blender and just a bit of Adobe Premiere Pro. And if you find this video useful and you want to learn more about product animation in Blender, then check out my premium product animation course. It's down below the video. Now let's get started. Anytime you're making a little project like this, the very first thing you want to do is build a little game plan in your head. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to make a game plan. So I got a notepad right here, and let's make a little list of things that we have to do here. And this is going to help you a lot, because imagine trying to build a fucking house without having a blueprint first. It's just not going to work. Number one, we have to make the can model. Two, we have to get textures. And I think the only texture we're going to need here is going to be a Pepsi logo. And maybe we edit that a little bit to write something like sugar-free or whatever. Then we have to make droplets with geometry nodes. I'm also going to need a 3D logo, so I'm going to write model logo here. Then we're going to need some background visuals, and once we got those ready, then we can start putting together the animations. And then of course after that we're going to have to render, post, process, add music, but we're going to cross that bridge when we get there. That's outside of the main steps inside of Blender. Now we have to make a can of Pepsi, but to make that properly we're going to have to use a reference. And I don't want to make a little sorry ass quarter-liter can. I want to get the big half-liter can, so I'm going to try to find a side view picture of that. Here's one right here. This looks like 500 milliliters, so this is going to be my background image. Right click, save image as, whatever. It's a fucking AVIF file, and I don't know if Blender can open that, so we got to find a different way to save it. Maybe we just take a screenshot of it. And now in Blender we have to load in the reference, so Shift A, image, reference. And once we got the reference in the scene, now we can start modeling the Pepsi can. This is going to take about 15 seconds to do. So let's go Shift A, mesh circle. I don't want this circle to have too many vertices because I am going to use a subdivision surface modifier. So let's leave it at 32 vertices. That's going to be fine. We scale it down. We extrude it up a little bit. We scale it up again. We're going to have this little bevel on the inside, so we have to pull this inwards a little bit, and let's add a subdivision surface modifier. Then we're going to extrude the body of the can. Then we extrude the top of the can right here. Now the good news is that we're not going to have to make the top surface. We have the opening pin because that part is not going to be visible in this animation. So let me just add a little bit of supporting geometry to the body, and then we take this loop from the top, we extrude that, we lower it down a little bit. That's just going to be this little metal frame. A couple more bevels up here at the top, and there we go. Now we got the soda can mesh ready to go. Now we can start thinking about the texture. So let's do the textures next. I'm going to hit Google Images, and in Google Images we're going to type in Pepsi logo. The first image right here is 1200 by 1200 pixels with a transparent background. This is from Wikipedia. That's pretty good. I found another one down here which is even bigger, so this is like 2000 by 3000, 4000. This is high resolution. It might be better if we're going to do some close-up shots, so let's go with this one. Right click, save image as. And now before we can apply the texture to this model, we first want to apply the subdivision surface modifier, and that's going to allow us to UV unwrap this a little bit better. So let's go over here, apply the subdivision surface modifier. It might be better if we first duplicate this model before we apply it. That way we have a backup over here. This is a low poly version. It's a little bit easier to change the shape of this can in case we want to change it later. We got this plan B over here, and here we apply the subdivision surface modifier. And now I just want to unwrap this surface from the front, so everything is going to be blue except there's going to be a logo here on the front. We don't have to worry about the nutrition labels or anything like that on the background. I think the best course of action here is to go to side view and then use the box select tool to select an area in the front, and in that general area we're going to have the Pepsi logo. So it's going to be something like this. Everything else is just going to be a simple blue or black color. So once we select this surface, you go up here to select loops, boundary loop, Control E to mark the seam here, and then we just press L in face select mode and we UV unwrap this island right here. In the UV editing workspace we can check the UV map. You can see that's pretty good. And now let's start creating the texture. So I'm in my shading workspace now. I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to name this can blue. I'm also going to have a black can and maybe another variation as well. And then we drag and drop the logo which we downloaded from Google, and now we have this in our blend file. So let's figure out how we're going to map this properly. We're going to plug this Pepsi logo into base color, and now you probably want to UV unwrap this again because the aspect ratio of the base image back here changed, and now it looks a little bit better. Now here's a problem with this texture. The texture is very large, so we have to scale up the UV map, but if we scale up the UV map, now we have this repetition. So how are we going to get rid of this repetition? All you got to do is go up to the image texture node here and change this thing from repeat to clip. Extend also seems to work pretty well, but I think that's only because the sides here are transparent and invisible. I think if we had any texture here touching the side, you would just see that stretched out on the parts where the image is supposed to repeat. So probably clip is the best way to do this. And now Now, it just occurred to me that when we use a sort of UV projection where we just take a surface, we unwrap it, and we place it over the image, this logo is not going to look like a perfect circle when we look at it from the front. If you look closely over here, we can try adding a circle, aligning that circle with our view. You can see clearly that the logo in the back does not align properly with the circle, and that doesn't look very good. And I imagine it's very important for these companies that when you look at the product from the front, the logo very clearly has to look the way it's supposed to look. It's not supposed to be distorted or anything like that. And this here is not really a minor distortion. It looks like a fucking square, so we can't go with this. Instead, I'm going to show you a different way to project this. So here's what you're going to do. You select your can, you go over here to the modifier tab, add modifier, edit, and in the edit section you pick UV project, and this of course requires you to place your camera in front of the can. So first make sure you don't have any x-axis rotation, so 90 degrees of rotation on the x-axis on the camera, then snap the camera to the can and just pull it backwards a little bit. You also probably want to make sure that your camera is set to orthographic projection here. Maybe you don't have to go to orthographic projection, but maybe we just want to use perspective with a pretty long focal length. So something like this I think is going to be just fine. And now in this modifier on the can, in the UV map, you select UV map. In the object you target your camera, and then you just type in the resolution of the camera. So in this case it's going to be 1920 by 1080. The resolution doesn't matter that much. The most important thing is the aspect ratio, and then we just have to reduce the scale until it looks the way we want it to look. So it's going to be something like this, right? You can also adjust the position of the camera to adjust the position of the logo. So I think it's supposed to be a little bit above the middle like this, and there we go. Now you can apply this modifier, and from the front view it looks like a perfect circle. It doesn't look like a good circle from the side view, but at no point are we going to show this can from side view, so this is not going to be a problem. I never paid attention to how this looks on cans in real life, and I don't drink fucking Pepsi, so I don't got any Pepsi lying around. But if any of you got a Pepsi can lying around, then please check and tell me in the comments, because I'm curious. When you look at it from the front, does it look like a perfect circle, or does it look kind of distorted when you look at it from the front? And how similar is it to the projection which we just created here? What does it actually look like? I'm really curious because I don't know. Anyway, now we got the logo projected on the can. It's a good time to make the can metallic and to reduce the roughness on the can. We also want to go to object shade smooth here, and now we're going to use something called a mix color node to control the color of the background, so it's not just black. I want this background to be blue. So let's place that mix color node down here, and we're going to plug the alpha channel from the image texture node into the factor input of the mix node. The reason for that is the alpha channel gives us a black and white image. The logo is not transparent, so it's completely white, and the background in the image is completely transparent, so it's completely black. And those are two fully contrasted colors, so we can use them as a mask. I know black and white are not colors, but whatever, you know what I'm talking about. And now instead of plugging the color here into base color, we're going to plug result into base color, and color A is going to be the color of the background, and color B is going to be the color of the logo. Of course, we don't want a green logo, we want to have a logo in the colors of the logo, so just plug this image into B, and there we go. Now we got a logo with a blue background. Isn't that beautiful? We have to add a second material to the top and the bottom, so let's just add a new material here. We're gonna name this material gray because it's just gonna be gray. Turn up metallic, reduce the roughness a little bit, and we need to apply the same material to the base of the can, so select a couple of vertices down here at the bottom, and then we apply this gray material there as well, and there we go. Our can is now ready. Now we can also duplicate this can and place another one on the side here. This is gonna be the sugar-free version. The sugar-free version is supposed to have a new material, so let's duplicate this can blue material. We're going to rename this to can black, and in this can black material we just replace the blue background color with a black background color. Maybe not completely black because that might be a little bit too dark, but just use something dark gray. I think it might be a good idea to have 3 varieties here, so let's add another one which we're going to call can gray, and this one of course is just going to be a light gray silver sort of color. So I think this is regular Pepsi, this is zero sugar, and this is diet Pepsi, whatever the hell that means. It's all poison anyway, so if you're gonna drink it, just drink the real thing. And let me just take this a step further. I'm gonna modify my texture here, so I'm gonna add a little bit of text. I need some zero sugar text, and I also need some diet text here. So to add those little elements, I opened up this logo in Canva. Canva is just a free, simple graphic design program. You can just Google it. It's totally free, but you just might have to make an account. They're not even sponsoring me or anything. It's just a pretty good program for this type of shit. So you go over here to the side, you click on text, add a text box. I'm gonna type in zero sugar, and let's flip that sideways so it's not getting in the way. We're gonna flip it by 90 degrees. I want to stick that into this corner here. We're gonna have to make this bold, and we're also gonna have to pick the right font. I don't know what it's gonna be, but we're gonna find something nice. I think Archivo Black is all right. On the other side, I'm gonna throw in another text box, and this one of course is going to say diet. Now I'm gonna have to color this text white, because that way the alpha map is gonna be white here while the background remains black, and we can use that to change the background color with the mix node. But there we go. Now you download this image to your computer, and now in Blender we just have to replace the existing contrasting texture with the texture that we just downloaded. It turns out our background is not transparent. That's because we didn't activate that when downloading from Canva. Now this is a premium feature, so if you don't got premium, that's tough shit, but I'm gonna assume that if you're following a Blender tutorial at this level, that you're also familiar with some other image editing program at a basic level where you can do this kind of thing in any other program. But now once we got this image loaded into Blender, now we can take a little piece from the bottom of this can here, and we're going to UV unwrap that little piece separately, and we're going to place it over zero sugar here, and we're going to do the same thing with the other side for the diet thing. And now once again we fucked up. These letters should have been black, not white, so I'm just going to go back to Canva. I'm going to edit that and I'm going to download it one more time, and there we go. That's beautiful. Now we have black letters here. Now the 3 variations of the Pepsi can are ready to go, so let's move on to the next part, and the next part is going to be all about making the little droplets that are going to make these cans look cute, so buckle up. Now we're going to use some geometry nodes to add some droplets to this can. So let's switch over to the geometry nodes workspace, and we're going to add a plane next to one of these cans. Now I'm doing this with reference to this video right here, so shout out to Mr. Poly Playground. I'm not going to go deep on explaining how these geometry nodes work. I'm just going to show you how to create little droplets very quickly, and then if you want to educate yourself further on the subject, I recommend you do that on your own time, because we don't have time for that here today. On this new plane, we're going to add a new geometry node setup, and notice how it changed my appearance. If you go to geometry nodes, by default your window for geometry nodes is going to be down here, and then you're going to have some bullshit numbers over here on the top left. I just switched mine up a little bit because I think the default layout is shit. Anyway, in these geometry nodes for the plane, you can change the name here to droplets or whatever. We're going to get rid of group input, and instead we're going to go Shift A, add an object info node here. Set this to relative, change this object to the can that you want to have the droplets on, and then you run this through a distribute points on faces node like this. You plug the points into geometry, so you can now see some objects on this can, and we're also going to change the distribution here to poison disk. Then we need an instances on points node right here, and with Shift A we're going to add a UV sphere node here. Now we don't need this many segments and rings because our droplets are going to be really tiny, so I'm going to set the segments to 16 and the rings to 8, and we plug mesh into instance. Now we can see the spheres on the can, but of course we're going to have to reduce the radius to make them smaller. Now for some reason object shade smooth doesn't work the same when you're doing geometry nodes, so with Shift A we're going to add a shade smooth node in between the UV sphere and the instance on points node. And we also got to add a transform geometry node down here, slightly increase the z-axis scale just to make these look a little bit longer. And I don't know what this next part does, but that's what the guy in the video told me to do, so go ask him. You take this rotation button, you pull it out, and then you add a vector math add node. You plug that into the rotation down here on the instance on points node, and we gotta increase this number to something like 1.6. It's something to do with the rotation of the droplets so they fit the surface underneath. And now we're going to randomize the scale a little bit in this node here. So Shift A, we're going to do random value down here. Make sure that this is set to float, and you plug that into scale here. You set the minimum to something like 0.067, and you set the maximum to something a little bit higher than that, but not too big because I want my droplets to be pretty small. And now we're going to move back here to where we got density max, and we're going to turn that shit up, change the random values of these droplets a little bit. So I'm going to go with 0.23 minimum and 0.35 maximum. You know, when you pull out one of these cans from the fridge, it doesn't have 3 big droplets, it's got more like 271,000 tiny ass droplets. And I don't know what this does either, but he told me we gotta throw in a realized instances points, and then we have to use a set material node to pick the material for these little droplets. So of course we gotta make a new material here, which we're gonna name drops. Just set that to glass if you're gonna use cycles. Reduce the roughness a little bit. You can maybe play around with the color if you want to, but if you're using cycles you probably don't have to do that. And by the way, the refraction index for water is not 1.5, it's 1.33. I don't know if it's going to look better, so maybe we'll just take it back to 1.5 later. Once you got this material, you just pick that over here in the set material node, and you're good to go. You got your droplets. Now let's check out our droplets with an area lamp over here in rendered view. Be advised that this shit is going to take 1,000 years to render. Maybe you can figure out a way to do this in Eevee, but I don't like how these droplets look in Eevee. I can't figure out a way to make glass look nice. I want this to look really nice, and I don't mind long render times. I sleep for 8-9 hours, so I'm okay. But as you can see from a distance, these droplets now look absolutely beautiful. You want to throw in this same setup on the other cans. If you want to apply this to the other cans as well, you got to take your plane, you're going to duplicate it, and in the duplicated version you're going to have to duplicate the droplets nodes up here in the geometry node settings, and in the object info node you're just going to target one of the other cans, and then do that one more time. So duplicate the plane, duplicate the nodes, and replace the object info target. So there we go. Now we got 3 cans of droplets. Just again, again, remember this is going to take about 17 years to render. I can shoot somebody in the head, do the time, and come back out, and it's still not going to be done rendering. But now I got our droplets ready to go. Next, let's create the 3-dimensional logo, which we're going to need in the animation. So now we're going to make a 3D logo, and to do that, we're first going to have to go Shift A, image reference, and we're going to have to find that logo which we downloaded from Google earlier. So here it is right now, and then we just have to click over here on one of these corners. We're going to go Shift A, add a plane, and in edit mode we're going to go X collapse edges and faces. That turns the plane into one vertex, and then we just extrude that up so it reaches the top of the letter here. We extrude out the edge so it reaches the side of this first part. Then we add a loop cut over here. Then we extrude this a little bit further out, and then I'm just going to model every single one of these letters using some very basic tools. There's not really that much to say here, so here's a little time lapse of how I do that. Well, now we got the letters ready right here, but that's not good enough. Now we're going to make these letters look pretty, so we have to make the rest of the logo. And here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to add a circle, so Shift A, circle. We're going to align it with our view and give that circle, let's say 64 vertices or whatever. It doesn't have to be too high. You're not going to see the outside of the circle. Place that on the white rim here, fill it with F. And now, of course, using the Boolean modifier, we're going to cut a hole in this circle using the letters. So target the letters, apply the Boolean, and now this surface below has the hole in the shape of the letters. I'm now going to fill the holes on the inside of those letters, so they are filled in, but they're still separate faces defined by the same outline as the letters. And then once we fill them all in, we select all the letters and we press I to inset, but then we press O for outset, and that's going to create this little extra edge around the letters, which you can see right here. And then once we got that extra edge, you just press Control plus. That's going to expand the selection a little bit to also include that extra edge. You're going to extrude this stuff backwards, and then once again press Control plus to expand the selection again. And this is where we're going to add some material. So the surface here has to be white with a low roughness value. Maybe we even make it a little bit metallic. But then to the surface on the inside, we're going to add another material, assign that here, click on new down here, and we're just going to increase the emission strength a little bit to something like 25 for now. And now when we bring back the letters, now these letters have a sort of glowing outline, and this looks like shit in texture view, but if we switch to rendered view with cycles, then it looks a million times better. And of course, if we turn up the emission strength, then the glowing starts to bleed onto the letters more and the environment as well, and I think that's a pretty damn cool effect. Now here's what we're going to do next. We're going to go back to front view, and in front view, in the middle of this circle, we're going to now add a plane, which we're going to align with our view. Scale that plane up so it's bigger than the circle, then subdivide it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 times. And then with our brush select tool, we're going to select all the faces which have this red color touching them. So you want to take your time with this because you want to be precise, because otherwise it's not going to look very nice. And we're going to use these fucking squares to create a pretty nice effect. So check this out. With Control I, we're going to invert the selection, delete all the other faces. And now once we got only these faces left, you're going to press I to inset, O to disable outset that we had before, and then I once again to enable individual insetting, and just inset all the faces just a little bit like this. And then once again invert to delete all the other faces, so now we have only the insides left. I'm going to duplicate these, rotate them by 180, so I also have them down here on the other side. And now we're going to do some pretty cool shit with these objects right here. So we're going to go back to the geometry nodes, and in the geometry nodes we're going to add a new geometry node setup, and this time this is my own design. I'm not thieving anybody else's fucking video. So we're going to go Shift A, search for and add an extrude mesh node, place that right here, and for the offset value here we're going to add a wave texture. You pick wave texture color and you leave that right there. We're going to set this here to Z. You have to make sure that the wave type is set to rings, and then you have to reduce the scale down to something like 0.1 or 0.05 or something like that. And I want these waves to move as time goes by, so we're going to go Shift A, add a scene time node, and the seconds output you're going to plug into phase offset down here. And now the seconds dictate the flow of this thing, but we first have to kind of reduce the contrast here. So between the wave texture and the extrude mesh node, we're going to add a color ramp node, place that node right here, and now the black you're going to increase a little bit. So we don't want it fully black, we want some sort of a dark gray, and now you can see the lowest point becomes this right here, and the highest point we don't want as sharp, so we're just going to reduce the intensity of the white color a little bit. And if you want to increase the time scale, now between the scene time and the wave texture with Shift A, you're going to add a math node, place that right here, set it to multiply, and now if you want to make it twice as fast, you can multiply this by 2, or if you want to make it only half as fast, you multiply it by 0.5, you get it. Now we're going to copy the same geometry nodes to this other object down here at the bottom, and then we're just going to give them some materials. So the top one, I want red. We're going to change the base color to red. I'm also going to make it metallic, reduce the roughness. Same thing for the blue one, except this one's going to be blue instead of red. And then just to make these things look a little bit prettier, in the shader editor for this material, I'm going to add a bevel node right here. We're going to plug that into normal. We're going to increase the samples to something like like 16, and this is going to make it look like there's a bevel on these edges even though there isn't a bevel. Right now you can see that the bevel looks a little bit too big, so we're going to reduce the width to something like 0.02 or 0.01. Now this still looks pretty shitty because we didn't do the frame yet, and we also didn't set up the lights, but once we set up the lights, once we set up the frame, it's going to look nice and cute. So we're just going to make the outside of this circle a little bit bigger, then we're going to add another circle in the middle of that, and that other circle is going to have something like 512 vertices. We're going to flip that sideways, and of course we're going to make this frame here black and completely shiny, so something like this I think is going to look nice and pretty. It's basically the same material as the letters. And now here we go. In the dark it looks pretty cool, but we can't see nothing, but once I just scatter a bunch of lights around the scene, now you can see it starts to look a lot better. I even used a little bit of depth of field here, so you can see I'm focusing on the lower part of the letters. My f-stop is very low, so everything outside of the focused area is going to be very blurry. And now I can keep playing around with this. So for example, I can change the color of the emission behind the letters to something like blue or red or whatever. I can even animate that. Then I'm probably going to animate these letters later on so that they pop out of this hole and then they come back down or something like that. So let's leave this sign be now. We don't need that anymore for now until later. And let's spend a little bit of time working on the 2D visuals, which are going to be on the background of the animation. Okay, let me show you how I made these graphic elements in the background of the animation. I knew when I saw them that I won't be able to recreate them exactly. I'm not a fucking 2D animator or anything like that, but it wasn't difficult at all to make something very similar to the ones that I saw in the reference. So check this out. Basically, we have very simple shapes animated inside of Blender with a transparent background. I'll quickly show you how I made and animated those little shapes. Then we have to export them. In Premiere Pro, we have to process them to make them look nice and pretty. And then later on, we're going to have to get some music, and we're going to have to sort of time them with the music in the animation. So here's how you do this. I have a square frame. My resolution is 1920 by 1920. And that way, if I want a 1:1 aspect ratio, I can use them for that. If I want a 16:9 aspect ratio, they're going to work for that as well. I can just crop them. And also if I want a vertical 9:16 aspect ratio, it's also going to work. So I need my 3D cursor in the middle of the screen, and then I just add a circle. Let's say that circle is going to have 32 vertices. It's going to be facing us like this. And then we move that circle over here to the side of the screen. We fill this in. We duplicate it a couple of times. We move it over to the side. So we have maybe 5 of these dots, let's say. And then this one here is going to be very small. This one here is going to be a little bit bigger. This one's going to be a little bit bigger still. This one here is going to be pretty big, and then this one's going to be a lot bigger. So they gradually get larger as we get closer to the outside. And then maybe we can copy a few more from the inside so it starts to get smaller again. And now we join all these into the same object with Ctrl J, and we place our origin point to the 3D cursor, which is exactly in the middle. And then of course we use our Alt E spin tool to arrange them in a circle. Use duplicates, give me 48 steps here. And here's what you do now. You go over to your data properties down here. You add shape keys, you click here twice, and then on key 1 you go to edit mode on this object. Make sure that you're in face select mode. Make sure that you got individual origins up here. On key 1 you're going to scale everything down to 0. And now when you go back to object mode, they're going to go back to their default original state. So now you can use this slider to change them between the original state and scale 0. And this basically allows you to animate the mesh. So now we're going to animate the mesh. So first we're going to scale this object in object mode down to around this size. This is on frame 1. We're going to insert our location, rotation, scale keyframe. Then on the same frame, we're going to turn up the value on this slider down here all the way up, and we're going to keyframe that there. And then let's say on frame 20, I'm going to reduce the value back to 0, keyframe that, and also scale this object up so it's around this size. Of course, once again, keyframe, location, rotation, scale, and then move down to frame, let's say 35, where you're going to scale this object further in object mode like this, keyframe, location, rotation, scale. But then once again, on the same frame down here, you're going to turn up the shape key value all the way up to 1, so you make these little circles small again, keyframe that again, and now we get this pretty cool pulsing effect. So if we just repeat that based on the rhythm of the music or something, it's going to be pretty cool. Of course, before we render this, we want to add a material which is going to be glowing, and preferably we want to give it a color. Adjust this later on. We're going to change the color a little bit as we post-process this, so it's going to be prettier. You got to make sure that you have your transparent background enabled over here in your render properties. Make sure you render this as a PNG. Make sure you got your RGBA channel active, and then you pick a folder for this, and you go up here to render animation. This is going to render a bunch of frames, and you want to be in Eevee when you do this because cycles is going to take too much time, and it's a really simple animation. You really don't need cycles for this, and it's not even going to take a minute to render this out. Now, you can play around with these things. You can create a bunch of different shapes and animations. I recommend you make a few variations. And now before we start processing anything, before we start trying to put together an animation or anything like that, you have to get some music first. Now a lot of people fuck this up, and I fuck this up from time to time as well. You got to get the music down before you start creating or designing the animation. If you make the animation first and then you try to align it with a song, it's going to be a million times harder. It's still possible. You can still do it. I did it in my toothbrush course that that way, but it's usually better if you pick the music first and then you make an animation based on the music. So I got a song right here which I can't play because I'm gonna get a copyright bust on my channel, and I'm using Adobe Premiere Pro, but you can probably use DaVinci Resolve or any other video editing program which can handle these basic features which I'm gonna use here. And you want to throw in your frames which you rendered from the animation. You want to select them all. In Premiere Pro they're gonna be imported as 5-second images, so we have to adjust their duration over here with the ripple edit tool and with the time duration tool. So I set this duration here to 0.0 whatever 01, and then I do the same thing with my other variations for the background visuals. As you can see, I made a couple of different versions. I'm probably gonna play around with some effects, so maybe I'm gonna add an echo video effect to one of these. I'm also gonna use my Lumetri color effect to adjust the colors, so I'll definitely have to turn up the saturation all the way. I'll probably play around with the tint to make the colors a little bit more blue. And now I got some of these little clips which I can duplicate if I want to, and I can try to place them over the music, and then that's gonna make the animation look a lot more appealing and a lot more interesting to look at. Now let's go back to Blender. I'm also gonna show you the logo animation and the can animations, and once we render those out, we're gonna be able to put everything together, and then we're gonna have a beautiful little commercial. And this is the type of shit that companies pay so much money for. You can buy a fucking car from one project. So let's go back to Blender now. Now let me walk you through the process of how I produced my final animation. I rendered a bunch of different animations, and then I later put them all together as different layers. So the first thing I rendered was this Pepsi logo right here, and by the way, I replaced the geometry node setup that I made earlier with these simple shapes. I think it looks a little bit nicer. I placed my camera over here to the side. This is where I rendered all the shots, and the camera has an aspect ratio of 1:1, so it's better for Instagram and stuff like that. And I have my logo start up here very close to the camera, and it spends maybe a second around here, and then it flies towards the back and it stays somewhere around here right in the middle of the camera. And later I'm going to have this fade away and turn into the logo which is in the middle of the can. And once I rendered that out, I moved on to the cans, which are the next most important thing. And first I had the blue can start over there in the back where it's very small, and then it turns and it flies close to the camera like this. And after that the next one comes in, and after that the final silver can comes in, and then after they all come together they do a little spin like this. And the really important thing here is that I timed these keyframes based on the music that I chose. So I figured that the music has a beat every 14 frames approximately, and I only figured that out once I put the song into Premiere Pro into a sequence which has 30 frames per second. And then since my Blender timeline has 30 frames per second, I figured okay, one beat is going to be 14 frames approximately. So I had the first can fly in here on frame 12, then exactly 14 frames later on frame 26 the black can flies in, and another 14 frames later the silver can flies in as well. And after that 14 more frames later they all do a little spin together. And also notice how my camera is slightly zooming in at first, and then after that it starts zooming out. This is just to make it a little bit more dynamic. You don't want objects to stand still, that makes them boring. Imagine you go to a party, you just stand there on the dance floor, that's fucking boring. You always want to have stuff moving, and we're trying to make an animation which kind of feels like a party. And after I render this scene out, now I got my Pepsi logo rendered, I got my cans rendered, and I also have the background effects rendered out, and now I just have to put all that together in Premiere Pro. So here's my project file in Premiere Pro, and by the way guys, I'm gonna make the Premiere Pro file and the Blender file available on my Patreon page if you want to check that out and break it down a little bit. So here's basically what I did. I got my little clip over here with my Pepsi logo, and then at some point as it flies back it gets replaced with the logo which we downloaded from Google earlier. It just makes it a cleaner picture, it makes it a little bit easier to animate. And I added some very simple keyframes to this object in Premiere Pro which just makes this little image bounce back and forth according to the beat. And as you can see in the background I got my beautiful 2D elements which we talked about before, and they're also timed to the music. After that we have the first thing come in. Now here's another thing that I did with the can. Notice these outlines here. I took one of the PNGs that I got when rendering this sequence for the cans. The picture is just a can with a transparent background. I threw this into ChatGPT and I told him recreate this image but just a white outline of the can on a black background, and I got this beautiful outline right here. I didn't feel like designing this myself from scratch. I downloaded that image, I put it into Premiere Pro to turn the white into blue. I should have just told ChatGPT to make it blue, but anyway, now I got that outline in Premiere Pro, and then the moment the can starts facing us in the front, I have this outline appear and it starts to expand because I keyframed its scale. And I do that a couple of times, of course. Once again I timed it with the beat, and that just makes a cool 2D visual. I did that once again when I had all the three cans together, and then once they're done doing their thing, once they're through spinning and once the animation for the cans is over, then I have them shrink so they fly back into the background, and once again the 3D animation of the Pepsi logo appears. This time it's inverted because this time I wanted to start in the back and I wanted to come over here to the front, and then it just fades away, and that's the end of the animation. Here's the full animation so you can check it out without music. You can see the logo is dancing, it's doing a little bit of fucking animation or whatever, and then the cans pull up, and then the cans spin, and then there's 2D effects, and the logo comes back up, and that's it. But just a little side note for everybody, if you're a beginner or intermediate, don't try to come up with your own ideas from scratch. If you're making animation, you want to be walking around town like I was in this situation, find something that you like, and then use that as inspiration. Take some elements from that animation. Don't try to come up with your own, because you're gonna fuck it up most likely. But now that I have this animation here, I can make something similar for any other beverage. For example, if I gotta make an advertisement for a fucking Dr. Pepper, I'm gonna try to put together something pretty similar because I like the energy of this advertisement. Of course, I wouldn't make it the same, but I would make some 2D elements like this. I would time it with some music. I would do some of these visuals that you see here. I'll probably make the cans in a similar way with all the droplets and all that. So pay attention when you're walking around town. Don't just scroll TikTok and look at bullshit on your phone. Look around you, look what other people are doing, absorb the world around you. You're gonna be able to learn a lot of things by just paying attention to your surroundings. I promise you that. That's all I got for you in this tutorial. If I missed something important, let me know in the comments. I can make another video to talk about it. Remember to check out my premium product animation course. That's a much more sophisticated version of what you saw here today. It's gonna guide you through all the little details of the modeling, texturing, rendering, lighting, animating, post-processing, putting together the animation. There's 44 videos in that course, so anything that you feel is missing in this short video is definitely not missing in that course. But like the video, subscribe to the channel, let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys in the next one.